We've been weakening our society since before my time. I started working at like 13 years old, a full-time job. I wrestled. I played every sport you can imagine. So the idea that they can't afford to have these kids do this is an anomaly for me in my mind. If there's an issue with inflation, we should address that with the federal government, not the state of Florida. So I appreciate you running this bill. You guys continue doing the great work and help change the youth out there to have them start working full time.
That was Florida House Republican. His name is Kevin Steele. He was commenting on a bill that would severely weaken the state's laws meant to protect child labor, meant to protect children from certain child labor practices. Now, according to a very smart guy, Tim Pool, who actually cares about the working class, allegedly, he thinks this is a great idea. He thinks that loosening regulations to make it easier for kids to work in like long shifts during school nights, totally fine. He says, F yes, kids need jobs. Let's get our kids back to work. Now, he didn't care to explain why kids need jobs, but in reality, this legislation isn't meant to help kids. This legislation, you don't have companies that are like falling over themselves to give children opportunities. There's a reason why they want to employ children, and we'll get to that in just a moment. But first, we need to explain what this bill would do. So under current Florida state law, 16 and 17-year-olds cannot work between 11 p.m. and 6:30 a.m. on a school night for obvious reasons. I would hope people would find those reasons obvious. Work more than 8 hours if they have school the next day, and work more than 30 hours during a school week or more than 6 days in a row at any time of the year. Remember, these are kids and their focus should be just finishing school. They don't have to go to college if they don't want, but we're talking about minors who are in high school. I can't, we have issues right now with kids not being able to read in America. And now we're gonna make the situation worse by loosening child labor laws and pushing kids into low-paying jobs, which is exactly what this is. Now, not only would House Bill 49 remove all of those protections, but it would also prevent local communities from passing any stronger child labor protections, much like the Texas Death Star bill. Now, you won't be surprised to find out that the people pushing this bill are not kids looking to be exploited or their parents looking to exploit their kids. The bill originates from the Foundation for Government Accountability, which is a lobbying group with ties to several conservative billionaires and business owners. So the FGA is funded by a broad swath of ultra-conservative and Republican donors, such as the Ed Uline Family Foundation and 85 Fund, a nonprofit connected to political operative Leonard Leo, who have similarly supported other conservative policy groups. And the FGA put a lot of effort into rolling back child labor protections across the country. But unfortunately, that's not their only goal. They've already done a ton of damage in the state of Florida alone. With the FGA cheering him on, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis has cut unemployment benefits for out-of-work Floridians, signed a union-busting law meant to make it harder for most public sector employees in the state to collectively bargain, and led a brutal purge of the state's Medicaid rolls following the COVID-19 pandemic. And John, I could be wrong, but I would venture to say that the individuals pushing for the loosening of child labor laws are, maybe just looking for cheap labor, which they can get away with when it comes to children.
100%. Yeah, it couldn't be more clear. And the only thing they love more than exploiting kids is doing it and then pretending that that is their demonstration of their commitment to the workers or whatever. Yeah, so much about this is so explicitly dishonest. Tim Pool, he's saying get kids back to work. No, get Tim Pool back to work. He needs a job. Okay, clearly he does not feel satisfied with the contribution that he is making, and so he wants to inflict onto kids the dissatisfaction that he has. He should do some actual work. The individual, Kevin Steele, that you talked about in the first place. First, I want to be clear: this doesn't matter. trying to encourage kids to cast off any aspirations beyond, whatever menial job they'll be allowed to have when they're 14 or whatever is ridiculous, regardless of his personal experience. But when he talks about like, I had a full-time job, and I wrestled and I did all these sports and I turned out great. Well, first of all, you didn't turn out great because you became an adult who's trying to get kids to work. So you went astray at some point along the way, but also, when were you wrestling if you were working this full-time job? What do you think full-time means? Is this like a midnight fight club that you were participating in? When was all of this sport happening? So I would love to have some people who knew him when he was a kid talk about what it actually was. He had a lemonade stand or he worked at the mall for a couple hours a week or something. And he thinks that that's justification to make kids work in meatpacking plants. By the way, I worked from a very young age, starting at 13, 14. I was a busboy, I worked at catering companies, I worked at a whole bunch of different stuff, but that was my choice, okay? And also, probably I would have done better in school if I hadn't been doing that. If I didn't feel the need to raise that money, I probably would have been set on a better path for the rest of my life, but they're not interested in that.
Well,
and really fast,
I got to comment on something you said, because I think that there is an important distinction and I don't want anyone to accuse us of being dishonest. Look, at the end of the day, it is the parent's choice and the teenager's choice as to whether or not they work these jobs, right? Even with the loosening of these child labor laws and protections. The problem is it creates a situation in which a 16-year-old can be scheduled to an 8-hour shift in the middle of the night. Like, you get what I'm saying? And if they refuse to take that shift because they have school the next morning, they might lose that job that they might like. They might enjoy working part-time. You get what I'm saying? So it creates a situation in which the power is shifted away from the government in being able to protect child labor from unfair practices and from ridiculously like long shifts in the middle of the night, to giving the power to these companies to, schedule these teenage workers as they please.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, he might have had some sort of job. Was he working the night shift? Was he working 40, 50 hours a week? Was he working 6 days in a row? No, he 100% wasn't. It doesn't matter if he did, but he also wasn't. Let's be clear about that. And you made the point that, why aren't we addressing, kids' bad like reading comprehension? I think they kind of are. They're not improving their ability to read, but they're perhaps removing their need to, because they're not interested in kids like going on to true careers, working in scientific and creative fields. They're interested in beating that impulse out of them at a young age, of making them feel like they have to be, and at best they will be, cogs in the corporate machine that they pretend to have some sort of problem with when it's Disney. That's what it feels like. I think it's super obvious. And honestly, the only reason I think some parents would go along with this is they have been put in such, hard economic times that they probably desperately need the contribution of their kids working.
Yeah, I am worried about that.
That's my fear.
That is my fear too. That's definitely my fear. And look, this isn't to say, John talked about how he had a job when he was young. I also had a part-time job when I was young. My first job ever was when I was 16, and I worked at a, what's the name of those donation centers? Goodwill. I worked at a Goodwill. I lasted a week because going through those bags of donated clothes was soul crushing, just based on what people were putting in those bags of clothes and how.
You disagree with the fashion choices?
No,
I'm kidding.
Like, don't donate your dirty underwear. Like, be a decent human being, okay? Like, it was, again, soul crushing. But I enjoyed, learning what it was like to work a job and have a manager. Like, there are benefits that come along with it. You just have to ensure that there are extra protections for young people. Doing away with those protections, obviously it's turning the clock around, right? To an era when companies took full advantage of child labor, did not have safe working conditions for them. And as you guys know, we've been covering all these stories that have been coming out about, teenagers working at meat processing plants and dying on the job because they're working with heavy machinery that they weren't supposed to be working with to begin with. So even with the protections in place, I feel like the government has done a pretty awful job in implementing penalties that would discourage them from breaking the law. But now the matter will be made worse by loosening some of the regulations that were meant to protect child I don't even want to say child labor, but it is true. Underage people in the workplace.
If you enjoyed this video, that's because of our members. They make us independent, they make us strong, and they make us honest. Become a member today by hitting the join button below.